Year 0. In the Beninging, the goddess Orsa was born. From where she came, no one can say, for it was before the time of recorded history. Yet with time came loneliness, and from loneliness came Finis, a secondary god created by Orsa. The two went on to create a world devoid of land or life, but it was a start. They also came together to bring 13 children into the world, who are now referred to as the 13 gods of Orsterra. The 13 gods created the land of Orsterra with the guidance of their mother, Orsa. But when it came time to divide the lands they had created, one god, the youngest, took a stand. Galdera, the 13th and final god, managed to slay Orsa and began a war against his siblings, determined to claim the entire world they had made. Against the 12 elder gods, the war was a bitter one, and only ended when Elfric brought the sacred flame from the heavens down and used it to seal Galdera in the Gate of Finis, a barrier between the realm of the living and dead. The battle didn't leave the 12 divine gods unscathed, however. They returned into the heavens, leaving their world behind for a time, and began to heal from their wounds. At the same time, Galdera didn't stop plotting. Though his physical body was gone, he managed to create a vessel, a daughter, who would one day escape from the Gate of Finis and try to find a way to restore his body. But that time was far off. For now, he waited patiently, biding time for his revival. Year 100. The primitive humans who inhabited Orsterra began to grow, and records of the Great War between the gods was marked down in ruins that would one day be overrun by plant life. And yet the gods wouldn't be easily forgotten. Rather, the Church of the Sacred Flame would begin to grow, and within the next century they would find the 3 flames across the continent and begin to grow their faith. Year 600. The Church managed to set up 3 main cathedrals, the same 3 that we see in present-day Orsterra. By the year 700, the rite of the kindling had begun, pilgrimage where a cleric visits each side of the sacred flame, refueling those flames with the power of the flame found in the Cave of Origins. This takes place every 20 years, and before long, many clerics began to make this pilgrimage, even when the kindling wasn't taking place. Year 1021. The Knights Ardent are founded, an official organization dedicated to protecting the Church of the Sacred Flame and ensuring that the clerics perform the kindling ritual have any protection they need. Year 1218. The Fairy Kingdom in the Riverlands and the Church of the Sacred Flame make an alliance, and with their support, the kingdom begins to expand, concurring their way into the Clifflands and making alliances with the Sunlands. For the first time in recorded history, a large kingdom has begun to grow. Year 1348. Solomon the Sage, a man from the kingdom of Bernstein, learns of the ruins in Duskbarrow and begins investigating them. He learns of the Gate of Finis and begins writing the book known as From the Far Reaches of Hell. And yet, this information opened Solomon's mind to Galdera, who sent him revelations demanding the opening of the gate. King Jenish also received these revelations, and with pressure from the king, Solomon began to go mad while trying to find a way to open the Gate of Finis. By the year 1401, a war that had been brewing for decades finally kicked off, as Grandport invaded the Flatlands. The Flatlands tribes banded together, and with the support of the Church and Knights Ardent, they repelled the invasion, creating a unified government in the Kingdom of Atlasdom. And in exchange for their service, the Knights Ardent were given an area in the southern Frostlands. This same year, the Kingdom of Bernstein and the Kingdom of Garnet felt the fires of war as well, as King Jenish desperately tried to claim a particular area in the other kingdoms. During this time, second Prince of Bernstein, Beowulf, formed a small band of elite soldiers, including Odin Crossford, a great sage and sorcerer, and Oscar Ravis, a knight. They fought against the opposing kingdom of Garnet, until discovering the dark dealings of Solomon and King Jenish. They intercepted them as the Gate of Finesse was opened, letting hordes of monsters escape, including the dark heir LeBlanc. But before Galderra himself could make an appearance, Solomon was beaten back by the small band, and using the relics known as the Dragon Stones, Odin sealed the Gate of Finesse. History was rewritten, hiding King Jenish from any blame for the incident, and Ravis was charged with protecting the Dragon Stones. To mend the ties between the nearly destroyed kingdom of Garnet, Beowulf married their princess, Hildegard, and together created a successor kingdom, which would be known as Hornburg. While the public began to again believe peace was coming, one woman, Seraphina, granddaughter of Solomon, grew bitter for the lies spread about her family. LeBlanc, the daughter, took notice of that bitterness and recruited Seraphina, giving her the gift of agelessness. Year 1492, the Highland city of Everfold, once ruled by the Ventus dynasty, was thrown into civil war after the death of the king's son. The half-son of the king and the king's youngest son began to contend with one another for the throne. Simeon, the younger prince, won, but went missing soon after. After the ruin that befell the city, the people there elected a new leader, and the Theatrum dynasty was established. Year 1503. A priest of the sacred flames, Matthew, could only watch as his village burned to the ground. He'd been appointed their priest and protector, yet his prayers had done nothing to save his people. Disappearing, changing his name to Matthias, the man hid from his past, betrayed by his gods. Yet a priest of another faith tracked him down. LeBlanc didn't promise an answer to prayers, but preached of tearing down the sacred flame. Gaining agelessness, Matthias met with another man in LeBlanc's circle, Simeon, who had also been granted agelessness. The two became fast friends, their hatred for humanity binding them together, and they created the group known as the Obsidians. Year 1594, LeBlanc made a contract with a man known as Werner, hiring him to decimate Hornburg. To LeBlanc, this plan was a way to remove the protectors from the Gate of Finesse, and for Werner, it was an opportunity to gain the wealth he'd always dreamed of. The pact was made, and Hornburg's fate had been sealed. Year 1597 and 1598. Hornburg was invaded by clans from southern Orsterra. While this war is waging, Werner took the opportunity to create his own mercenary band, Black Brotherhood. They joined in the war efforts and began building a reputation. And at this time, Archbishop Joseph performed the rite of the Sacred Flame. Year 1603, a war between the Revan and Edoras kingdoms began, and Archbishop Joseph goes on a pilgrimage to help the survivors. There, he meets a 5-year-old Ophelia, orphaned by the war, and took her in. At this time, LeBlanc's plans were in effect. Yet despite her years of living in Orsterra, she still didn't know how the Gate of Finesse worked. There was one place she knew she could find the answers. She needed access to Solomon's research from the far reaches of hell. To get this access, she met with 2 scholars, Lucia and Yvonne. In exchange for the book, LeBlanc showed Lucia the location of a long-lost library in Duskbarrow, dating back to the Age of Gods. Yvonne assassinated the current headmaster of Atlaston's Royal Academy, taking his place and gaining access to the Academy's library. LeBlanc gained the information she needed, leaving the two scholars to their own devices. Year 1606. The group known as the Obsidians began their operations in Noble Court, one of the most renowned cities in the world. They stuck to the shadows for the time being, keeping a low profile. At the same time, Graham Crossford sets out on his adventure, leaving his son Kit with his friends as he embarks on a quest to save his wife, who had contracted a rare disease with no known cure. Crossford's adventure brought him to the Grand Port Bazaar, where he picked up a journal, turning it into his travel log. At the same time, Astor Windham decided to sponsor the bazaar and began a gift auction, trying to cheer up his young daughter, who longed to see the world but hadn't the health for it. This began an annual tradition, which began to inspire merchants from all walks of life. Year 1607. The Obsidians began to grow more bold with their plans. The Azelhart family began to notice their presence. Simeon, the leader of the Obsidians, decided to infiltrate the Azelhart household as a gardener and meets a young Primrose. On the other side of the world, a young Therion meets Darius and Saintsbridge. The two become quick partners and friends, and in another corner of the map, the apothecary Ogun finds the man who killed his wife. Acting without remorse, he takes his revenge and leaves, wandering without a destination in mind. Year 1608, Graham Crossford's life has turned for the worse. After 2 years of traveling the world, he'd managed to procure the needed ingredients for his wife's cure. But while traveling back home on the ship of Leon Bastrel, he received the news he was dreading. His wife was gone. Graham fell into despair, leaving behind his travelogue and wandering aimlessly for a time. He eventually ran into a young boy named Alphen, who was suffering from the same illness as his deceased wife. He used the cure on the boy, but the good deed wasn't enough to pull him out of his despair. He met a similarly lost man while traveling, a fellow traveler and apothecary who had lost his wife, Ogun, and the two spoke for a while. Yet still, Graham could only think of the one he'd lost. Then, finally, a spark of hope appeared in his life. A woman named LeBlanc claimed that there was a way to bring his wife back from the dead. It would take time for the preparations to be complete, but for the first time in ages, Graham felt he had something to live for. LeBlanc had the information she needed, and now she had the sacrifice as well. But she was still missing 2 things that were holding her back. First, she needed the keys to the Gate of Finis, and luckily for her, her plan for getting said keys was finally in motion. The Obsidians were ready to strike. Their first target was House Ravis, the family holding on to the Dragon Stones, the key to Finis's gate. Matthias led the attack, killing Lord and Lady Ravis and claiming the stones. Then, leaving behind 2 young heirs, Rondo Ravis set out to become a Knight Ardent, leaving behind his younger sister, Cordelia Ravis, and their trusted attendant, Heathcote. Cordelia, despite her losses, and only being 7 years of age, managed to hold the family together with the help of Heathcote, and began making plans to reclaim the Dragon Stones. Though their purpose had been lost to time, the importance that the Ravis family always had for the stones could not be overstated. They were important, even if Cordelia didn't understand why, and she had to retrieve them. The Obsidians had fulfilled the main job LeBlanc had given them, but that wasn't the end of their ambitions. Matthias began searching for power in a remote village, converting others who had experienced the same tragedy he had. And Simeon decided to set his sights on Noble Court. He could push his right-hand man in charge there, nearly uncontested, if it weren't for the Azelhart family. And so he and his 2 most trusted minions killed Geoffrey Azelhart, leaving behind a confused 13-year-old Primrose. Year 1610, after 2 years of searching, Primrose found herself in the town of Sunshade. At 15, she was already a beautiful girl, and she would use it to avenge her father. She found a tavern rumored to have connections with the obsidians and began working there, despite the costs. Not far away, Werner finally managed to make good on his deal with LeBlanc. Using Erhard to assassinate the king, Hornburg fell into chaos, with Oberic fleeing in shame. Werner and his soldiers spent the next few years eliminating any remaining noble houses in Hornburg until it was completely in ruins. Once that was done, Werner disbanded his team, taking his payment from LeBlanc and heading off to fulfill his wildest dreams. Year 1612. With the gate of Finis unguarded, LeBlanc and Graham Crossford headed to the gate. Using the dragon stones, the gate was unlocked. Equipped with all the information needed, LeBlanc began her ritual. The ritual to sacrifice Graham Crossford and use his blood to revive Galdera. But before the ritual could be completed, Graham had a realization. LeBlanc had been lying to him. This ritual would not bring his wife back. And worse, he realized that if he failed to meet LeBlanc's desire, she would go after his other family members, after his son Kit. And so he began to attack. He landed only a single strike on LeBlanc, but it was more than enough to drive the woman back. Interrupting the ritual, he needed to finish her. And yet, his body began to move independent of his mind. Another thing was taking over, and he began to wander, blacking out for longer and longer periods of time. And far away, a young thief felt the pain of betrayal for the first time. Most would see it as an insignificant event, this thief being cast off from his friend left to die. But to Aber, a chosen hero was in the making, one hero of several who might be able to fight against the new darkness in the stead of the gods themselves. Year 1615. The events of Champion of the Continent begin, but that's a story for another day. Year 1616. A red-eyed monster began ravaging the world, turning men to stone at a mere glance. This creature went from myth to horrifying reality as people began to see more and more evidence of its true destruction. Far away, the beast's first victim, LeBlanc, finally recovered from her horrible wounds. Hiding away in Seraphina's cult, possessing the woman's body for her own purposes, she finally broke free, setting off once again to resurrect Galdera, leaving Seraphina to die. There are only 2 people with Crossford blood remaining. There is Graham's son, Kit, but LeBlanc set her sight on the second, a young woman named Renew, who was apparently the illegitimate child of Graham Crossford. However, she was killed before LeBlanc could get to her, leaving only one last target, Graham's son. And not long after that, Zonta the Hunter was commissioned to hunt the Red Eye, being one of the few hunters who might be skilled enough to stop the beast. He headed off, leaving behind his apprentice Honnet. And with that, the 8 chosen heroes of the gods were all in position to reach their destiny. Year 1618, the events of Octopath Traveler begin. A story I'm sure many of you know already. And that is the complete timeline for Octopath Traveler. At least, most of it. I mean, there is a second game that I haven't covered at all, not to mention Champions, a game I still haven't played. So there are still more stories for me to tell. But this will be all for today. If you want to stay notified when my next upload appears, subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.